experience. We've been trying to get the people away from the bar to this panel, and we've been trying to convince them that this bar is just as good as the other one. You're doing a great job. Thank you so much. Perfect. So they're gonna have to come at some point if they want more drinks. So thank you for joining us. This is, I believe, the last panel of the day. And this is gonna be on cinematic VR, and more specifically the work of a very small company that nobody knows about called Jaunt Studio. And we're very, very happy and lucky to have here with us almost full crew of one of the latest Jaunt VR project called The Game. The Game is a horror experience that you will learn more about in a minute. That was pre-released at the New York Comic Con a couple of weeks ago, I believe,
Yep.
and will be soon followed by a wider release on the Jaunt platform. So it's a great pleasure for me to have those panelists. I always, when I do panel on virtual reality, I try to show a range. I want to have people talking about different things. I'm very happy that we have with us the director, the actress, the colorist. I think this is the very first time we have a colorist on a VR panel. Yay! And we have the two producers of the show. So I'm gonna ask you guys and Gil to introduce each other. First, we're gonna start with the director of The Game, John Grod.
Hi, everyone. So just to clarify, Maceo and Ryan, my colleagues here, we share credit as co-creators of the show. So we're all directors and producers and editors and everything else. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, John.
Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I've spent about 8 years in stereoscopic animation and conversion. Worked for DreamWorks and Sony ImageWorks for a while, and was on the Titanic 3D conversion as the comp soup for that. And I've also spent a fair amount of time in the ad space as an editor. And then for the last 2 years, been working in the VR interactive space. Dave.
Cool.
All right. Now we have Dave Franks, who was the colorist of the movie.
Hi, I'm Dave Franks. I have come up through visual effects and color and imaging for feature films, working both in the 3D stereoscopic space as well as in 2D. I've been working over at Jaunt for about 6 months. I, in the past, have worked as a stereo supervisor for both live action and animated as well as 3D converted shows. I taught the 3D boot camp over at the Sony 3D Tech Center, and porting over to VR was a nice transition because of my imaging experience. And I do color on the show, but I also do a lot of finishing, which enhances the imagery to make it more compelling and engaging. And I'm glad to be here and happy to answer any of your questions as we get into it. Thanks.
And then we have Kimberly Hidalgo, who was the lead actress on The Game.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Hidalgo. I've been an actress in LA for 8 years now, doing film, television, worked on a lot of different shows, and recently did a Western called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. But yeah, this is my first experience acting in VR, and happy to be here.
Then we have Ryan Berges. I'm the only one who can pronounce your name correctly. The co-creator of The Game and also producer at Pulp Digital Production.
Hi, I'm Ryan Berger. Thanks for being here, people. Let me see. I've been a filmmaker in LA since 2005, 2007-ish. Started Pulp Digital Productions with my my co-owner here, Maceo Greenberg, about 5 years ago now. And we got into the new beginning of VR, which is really exciting pretty early on. And so we've been just doing a bunch of different projects, from documentaries to short films to commercial concepts, pioneering a few different techniques along the way, and I don't want to spoil everything, so I'm going to pass it to Maceo.
Maceo Greenberg, also co-creator and a producer at Pulp Digital Production.
Thanks, Celine. Yep, I'm Maceo, and as Ryan mentioned, we started Pulp Digital about coming up here on 5 years ago, and since then we've done quite a cool and broad range of content. And actually, we went to film school with our dear buddy John Grod here, so that's actually how we all came to be here and worked on this project together. So VR is an extremely exciting place to explore storytelling, and it's where we want to go. So we're really enjoying it and definitely exploring some new frontiers.
Thank you very much. And I'm Celine Tricart. I'm the founder of Lucid Dream Production. I'm focusing on VR and stereoscopic 3D. I was very lucky to work on 2 Jaunt projects as a director of photography, and it's truly an honor to have all of you guys with me today. So I think first of all, we're gonna show you what I call the trailer for the series. And do you want to kind of introduce it? Like, what's the,
Sure.
what are we gonna be looking at?
Yeah, essentially, this is a pilot now confirmed full series for Jaunt Studios, and the 3 of us sort of had the idea coming in as what kind of story would we want to tell that's not just tacking on VR to the story itself, but is really intrinsic to what we wanted to achieve in the new medium. So this is basically part 1 of 2 for this pilot episode, which we're calling a teaser, but it's about 4 minutes. We may or may not go through the entire thing, but
And how many episodes total?
we're still hammering out exactly how many episodes will be in the first series, but they'll probably average about a little under 10 minutes. So yeah, I mean, obviously this, VR is not meant to be seen on a Presidium, on a 2D flat screen, so it's not an ideal environment. We do have some Gear VRs if anyone's interested about staying afterwards and really watching it in the designed immersive experience that we shot this project for. But we can get a little bit of a taste on, the 360 experience, which is, I'm sure everyone here knows the difference between 360 and VR, which is the stereoscopic aspect of it as well. So just a great little horror piece that we came up with, and we'll give it a run. So. Yeah.
Can we dim the lights a little?
What's this playing over? This is my first time doing this as well, so.
Can we take the lights down, maybe? No?
Okay, so we're not going to take the lights down, but John Grod will direct your VR experience now.
No, it's not.
I'm not getting any sound here.
Okay, so
There.
can you not do the duplicate screen and just have the same screen?
Oh, I think we need to mirror this, right, in order to
Yeah.
watch it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
There we go.
There you go.
I'll plug all the wonderful Jaunt pieces of software afterwards when we've gotten through it. I won't torture you with that now. So.
All right, let's see if we have sound.
Doesn't seem to be playing.
Looks like it's off screen or something.
All right,
Hold on.
All right, welcome in VR. So when you think it's gonna work, it never works. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, hold on one second.
That's stereo.
If you have time afterwards.
So, yeah, we're using one of the Jaunt software that's called Jaunt Player, where you can play, because Jaunt, once you use the camera and you stitch it together, comes in a format that is not the traditional equirectangular format for VR. It has its own, let's say, format. So you need to be able to play it using the Jaunt Player. Okay, there we go.
Still not getting any sound. Yeah. Well, here, we can do this. We can kind of like walk through this a little bit. So essentially, I'm controlling the image here by scrolling back and forth on the desktop. If you're using a headset, obviously wherever you look, you're going to be changing the hemisphere of the image, which is part of the big part of head tracking with the Samsungs and the Oculus Rifts. Well, this is just the teaser, but
we had sound earlier. Do you know? It's not on your end. Okay.
why don't we get into the
We should probably show them.
we can
Yeah,
figure
sure.
this out, so.
All right. So first of all, this is, as you might have seen, this is a horror piece. So my first question is for the co-creators of the show and you, John. I mean, all three of you. Why VR? Why horror? Do you think horror is a genre that is particularly fit for VR?
Mace, you want to start? Okay. I mean, I think right now the accessibility and education about VR and just reaching audiences in general is the first major hurdle. And not to take anything away from horror or any of the other genres, it just seems like the type of story right now that people can most easily jump into and not have to think too much about, and just experience the technology and the visual and a real sort of emotional reaction. So this was a story that, like I said, we had come up with a while back, and just thought was an interesting story in the larger universe of this concept, but would work really well to educate people on who haven't seen VR, who haven't experienced 360 video, to kind of get a good feel of the difference between the 2D aspects and 2D filmmaking approaches that we also use in addition to new techniques for the spherical cameras. So yeah, I mean, it really started to flourish over the last year when we were developing the project, and it seems like it's gotten pretty well received. And at Comic-Con New York, it's obviously the right time of year with Halloween coming up next week, so we're hoping it's appropriate timing for people to kind of enjoy the season and have a little fun and experience something new.
When you look at all the VR content out there, there's a lot of horror pieces, zombies or haunted houses. Why is it such a obvious choice for VR?
I think there's the primal part of watching any horror piece really becomes central when you're forced to experience it and kind of close off your other senses to these pieces. And I think it hits this really root level of our humanity that, where a lot of us like to be scared and stuff like that. So I think when we're closing off our other senses from the world and kind of going into the world that we're creating, it's super attractive to be part of this story in particular, this fight for survival that Kim's character is trying to escape from.
Well, that's a perfect transition. Thank you very much. Okay, there is a lot of panels on VR. There is actually very few panels that focuses on the art of acting for virtual reality, and I think this is a very important issue. What are your thoughts? This is your very first VR project, so how is it for you working with, first of all, with a VR camera that's kind of very different than traditional camera, and was the way you consider your character, was it different because it was in VR?
It's interesting because I'm used to, as an actress, acting for the close-up, and with a VR camera, you don't really have that really tight, on your eyes moment. So I've kind of, when approaching this project, looked at it as marrying film acting and theater acting a little bit, because as a viewer, you're not as tied in on me. But it's actually a really cool experience shooting in VR because everyone's out of the room because it's 360. So the directors, all the crew, they're all outside of the space, and you're on set with no distractions. The only thing in there is the 360 camera, and as with any acting, you kind of just ignore the camera, so that's the same. But it was really cool to be able to work around it and not have the distraction of crew and other things going on. was more immersive as an actress as well.
John, you want to talk about directing actors in VR?
Sure, and I'll let the guys chime in on this as well. I mean, I think it's analogous to the question of like what's different about storytelling in VR, and it may sound like a oversimplified answer, but a good story is a good story. Good acting is good acting. I think maybe with the exception of acting, poor acting is amplified in VR. And I think Kim's performance in the piece, should we, you guys have the chance to watch the demo, we'll see that, talented actors really shine through in this medium. And it's very difficult to, like you're talking about, using close-ups and using coverage to cut around potentially not such great performances. So, it's what you see, what you get. It's sort of a weird hybrid of a theater experience and an organic performance that you might get in a situation like that, but also the filmality, the cinema aspect of what we're doing, and try to blend these two different things. So you just try to work with your talent and motivate them properly, and connect with them about their character and the story and where you want things to go, and
do you think it's the role of director for VR? Is it more akin to directing for theater, or a lot of people say no, VR has nothing to do with theater? Or how did you rehearse? You couldn't see the takes, you couldn't see anything.
Well, we did develop some kind of guerrilla filmmaking, video village type review stations. Wasn't necessarily live preview, but we'd be able to go back and kind of review a take, and also for a fair amount of scenes, one of us would sit in the circular hemisphere, and then you can always composite people out in post-production as well. So that'll lead into a question about what do you do about the camera, what do you do about lights, what do you do about the crew, and all these things. And in the modern digital age and how CG heavy so many films are now, getting clean plates and compositing, things that you don't want in the shot out is not such a major hurdle anymore. But
yeah, that's just part of the job. What John's saying. The cool thing working with Kim, I've known Kim for a long time actually. Me and Kim kind of grew up together, and I met her doing theater, which is really awesome. And I feel like people who say it's not really like theater maybe don't have the background that I do, or that some of us do up here. And the cool thing, we did a fight scene in this film, and so we would prep that with the stage, a certain square area, and the fight choreographer made a really cool comment. He was like, because I was like, yeah, it's like theater. I was trying to describe to him, it was his first 360 project, or first VR project as well, and I was trying to describe to him the thought process behind it, because you kind of have to use these introductory language to talk to new people about VR, and you're trying to figure out how you used to think about it. So you're talking to this fight choreographer, Peter Greyhouse, who he did a great job on this fight scene, working with Kim and Megan, and he came up with a really cool term that I really love to use now, which is theater in the surround instead of theater in the round. So I thought that was fantastic, and I will always quote him on that, because I just thought it was great. And so, yeah, kind of what Kim was saying too, the small moments that you think you're missing, because of traditional film, you get a close-up, you're kind of now figuring out how to indicate for lack of a better term, those small moments in the sphere. So, yeah.
Yeah, blocking is just such a huge part of that, and that's where the theater background, I think, really comes in handy, because you can really draw on that and use that to fill the space. And I think if you have a theater background, you're going to be more comfortable utilizing the whole space and really being comfortable with blocking it out.
Camera right is what now? Camera left is what now? We kind of deal in hemispheres, I think.
Yeah.
And by the way, if any of you has any question in relation to the subject we're talking about, acting, directing, blocking, please raise your hand. I'm going to do a Q&A session at the end, but I'd rather have direct question. You have a question over there? Okay. Yeah, please don't. Any questions so far? Acting, blocking, all good? Okay. Okay, now I want to talk more specifically about producing for VR. A lot of people are asking questions about the size of the crew, the budget. Is it very different than traditional filmmaking from a purely producing standpoint?
Well, like most productions, script is the first part that indicates what the size of the project is going to be. For this particular project that we did, it was, I would say, pretty ambitious, and we had a pretty small crew for what we tried to accomplish, especially our first day. I think we've talked about looking back, we would have probably liked to have had 2 days to shoot our first day, which was in this warehouse downtown LA with this, so we did a fight scene one day in the whole fight scene, and then we went upstairs and we shot all the kind of the creepy movement moments, and then also Kim's character waking up moments and having a dialogue with this monitor. So does
it take longer to shoot VR versus traditional?
It takes a lot longer because you're not, where you think you can. Well, right now it takes a lot longer because you're also having to convince the crew that they have to do things a little bit differently too.
Yeah.
So like, for instance,
training.
our boom ops showed up and he's like, so I'm gonna boom from, and we're like, okay, oh shoot. So we're gonna probably rely heavily on laughs. If you can hide it, then that's great. So we're really talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point though, because we were actually hiding. We had them hiding, planting mics in weird places, and that is a big part of it. The educational side of it, like you were saying, Ryan, where you have to really reteach people about the process because it's 360. So if you could see the camera, you're in the shot. Can you see the camera? Oh, you can. All right, you're in the shot. So that's an interesting part of the process as well, for sure.
And a lot of people stop right there and they're like, well, it's too hard. Can't get 50 people on that crew. Can't do that project. It's not going to happen. But we see it as like an awesome challenge, and we really came to on that.
Bleeding into that real quick, and I think Dave can probably follow up on this, is lighting. So it's sort of like, again, hiding lighting and whatnot. And I think
practicals. You
just have to have an open mind about how you're going to light a set. I think sort of a blanket fill is not extremely interesting nor cinematic. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. And
I think the biggest thing for me, coming from proscenium-based features, whether it's 2D or 3D, has to do with that surround aspect. And I think what is really helpful to keep in mind, especially if you're keeping the camera stationary, is it's very easy to incorporate visual effects into the workflow to be able to clean up the image. So for example, if the camera is stationary and you have the director there coaching some scenes, you can very easily, right after that shot, shoot a clean plate, and then in the hemisphere where the director is standing, you can composite in the clean plate of no director there, and it's with After Effects and Nuke and how cheap software is these days and how tech-heavy post-production is, it's very easy to quickly just comp in the other side of the hemisphere without, without the director. The same with practical lighting. Like, for example, if you want to shoot a scene where you have lights shooting one way, but then you don't want to see those lights, you can comp them out. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that you need to, and this is why maybe it takes a little longer, is because you can incorporate visual effects to clean up those hemispheres to have a very barren scene. And yeah, one other thing I wanted to talk about, especially as a newcomer coming into VR, is what makes it so powerful for a horror genre is the aspect of being a voyeur. And I think what's really daunting and I'm strictly on the post side, so I wasn't familiar with the story. I'm just doing the finishing, but you get into it and you're realizing that it's like you're alone, you're wearing a headset, and you're watching something that's very violent, that's very scary, and it's a lot more daunting than it would be if you're watching a traditional proscenium-based show where you're sitting there with other people. And the other thing to keep in mind, sorry, I'll show up in just a moment, it has to do with the audio cues, and that you are directed not only by the lighting, but also the dynamics of the audio, to be able to where to look and, where is the murderer coming from. And all of that voyeur aspect is really very powerful and very compelling, much more compelling than a proscenium-based show, whether it's 2D or 3D. So.
You're ruining my
I'm sorry.
sound. Very important. Every single panel is say the same thing. Sound is vital. We don't have the sound recordist or post-production sound supervisor with us, but this is especially for horror. I mean, it plays a huge role.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to be a broken record, but it's just an amplification of everything you would use in 2D filmmaking again.
Did you script those interface elements before you went into production?
Which elements? The audio cues and whatnot?
Repeat the question.
In other words, things that would have been, character look stage left, this is audio cue stage left, causes user to want to look stage left.
Like partially.
Yeah, I think there's I think there's yes to some, and yes, yeah. So that's he's just asking how much we basically pre-pro for sound design and on set and the performance and
script.
And the script and what might be added in post production. And it's like when we were working with Dave, there was definitely a look in mind that we wanted for this piece. At the same time, I think we all feel pretty passionately about, and Kim as well, when you work with artists and talented people, you definitely want to let them do their job. And so the sound design on this piece was, I think, pretty phenomenal, as well as the color and the performance. And I think when we worked with Aurelia Soundworks, who are based out of here in Los Angeles and London, obviously we had the ambisonic audio. We have a Tetra mic, which basically attaches to the Jaunt 1 camera. And it's 360 sound. We have lavs, we have everything else. So they'll go ahead and mix that ambisonic environmental sound, but then they'll clearly do sound design as well to amplify anything else, any beats and cues that we may want. So, we may give the rough cut to the sound design team and go, here's all the ambisonic, here's all the temp sound effects, and watch it play out, and they'll put their own fingerprint on it and use that as well. Because I think right now, professional sound designers for ambisonic audio are really the only people who are going to have that live edit session playability to really hear things out until you get a final product. So in a certain way, you do have to rely on their expertise and creative imagination for some of that stuff. Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, so there's a certain amount of cues that we plan for, and then there's certain things that once you get into the dailies and the posts, you realize you have to, not to get too off topic, but a lot of, I think, our experience is observing other people and how they watch and experience VR. I tend to think that anyone tells you who has a silver bullet for VR storytelling at this point is kind of full of BS. I think most people are still learning, and which is a great thing for creative people who have an open mind. It's a real exciting time to discover new things and see what works and what doesn't. It's like this fly's flying around my head. So yes, there's obviously a lot that we want to plan for, and then there's things that we have to wait and see and post. This would be a great 360 video.
There's one right here.
So, oh yeah.
Do you want to take a look at the behind the scene? Hopefully we can have sound.
Is there sound?
Let's see.
Okay, there's no sound.
So yeah,
Is it?
No sound.
Is there a matter of setting the speakers to be?
Yeah, do you want to check that out?
That sounds.
Did someone else have a question down here in the audience before? Yeah, sure.
It's just like a.
I think we're trying to show some behind the scenes footage from the shoot, but it doesn't sound like.
Did you have
it's
another
gonna be-
question back there?
Yep.
Oh, there we go.
We have sound.
We'll get to you.
Sound.
I think he had a question.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Handle it.
Is it a relatively camera agnostic process? I mean,
Right. I mean, we as a company, before we launched the Jaunt 1, we mostly used, which is pretty universal, GoPro rigs. There's a few red rigs floating around, and A7Ss I think as well, which
dark corners
are great, and red can get a beautiful image. Right now, I think it's a fairly cumbersome process to shoot with. But yeah, I mean, the Jaunt 1 is a fairly seamless camera, and I think really allowed us a lot of freedom to do a lot of our typical 2D filmmaking approaches and apply it to VR space.
Yeah, absolutely. But from me and Maceo coming in working, this is the first time we worked with the Jaunt 1, and we had worked with a bunch of different 360 cameras prior to this, and we kind of came at it talking with John Garrett about it, that we're like, well, what are the weaknesses? Because every camera right now has got something that's not, because we have this like perfect vision in our mind, obviously, like all of you probably, like we don't want to see any lines, we don't want to see the tripod, we don't want to see any of that stuff, like nobody wants to see that stuff. So we're like, what are the weaknesses? So we look at the camera and we're like, well, we need to try and plan these shots to work best with the strengths of this camera, obviously, because every camera right now it's not a perfect system yet, but it's close.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to pick the right tool for the job. So there's some different rigs that might work better for different situations, but the Jaunt's just, there's really nothing that compares to it in terms of what we worked with at this point.
It's the best.
It gives you the most flexibility, and if you're on a tight schedule, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a camera that's gonna work better.
With regard to shooting in 2D or 3D, the Jaunt 1 extracts the stereoscopic image from the 2D image. So when you use it, you can either choose to have it mono or stereo, because the 3D is actually taken from pieces of the other camera. And if you're working in the field and have access to Wi-Fi, you can have stuff sent up. Jaunt offers a cloud-based like near set lab where you can send stuff up to be stitched and pull it back down if you have a fast enough connection to be able to have this, your lab working while you're shooting to be able to speed up production.
That's great.
It's got 2 seconds of black on it.
Oh no, we broke it already?
No, it's just got 2 seconds of slate.
This is all part of the marketing plan to get you guys pumped up to actually do a demo. So, I mean, quickly, just to build off what Dave was talking about, apart from the Jaunt 1 being extremely user-friendly camera, the Jaunt Cloud services are something I think almost entirely unique at this stage in the game in terms of, we can go out on a shoot. We wrapped on a Sunday night. Monday morning, I had dailies footage that I would be able to pull right down into the edit bay from the cloud and start cutting and building our assembly. So, I've worked at a couple other 360 VR companies as well where, people are still hand stitching stuff. And, if you have an army of rotoscopers in India or somewhere else where it's fairly cheap to do, that might be an option. But I think as the industry goes forward, you're going to probably see this as a gold standard in terms of going out, shooting something, sending it up to a cloud service of some kind, and getting back a stitched image.
I wanted to ask a question. I don't know how many people are familiar with VR. I am a newcomer to VR, coming from 3D and 2D, and I didn't really understand it. So can I see a show of hands who understands how that process works? Or why don't you raise your hand if you want me to explain it briefly? I don't want you to explain it. Okay. So basically you have a camera, which is a series of cameras. In the Jaunt case, there are 24. There are 16 going around like laterally around an equator, and then there are 4 up and 4 down. And what that gives you is 24 images that are they're actually higher in their, unlike normal proscenium shooting, which is wider than it is tall. These are taller than they are wide. And you take all these single images and you stitch them together in the same way that your iPhone can do a panoramic when you go around, and automatically it gets stitched. So you can either do that by hand, or Jaunt Cloud Services offers an automatic stitching process where you can send all those cameras up. It can give you a lat-long image, which is a single image that's either stereo or mono, and shows you a complete 360-degree view that is standardized for you then to put into a viewer to be able to see it on a Gear VR or any sort of VR headset head-mounted display. So without going too far into it, that's how it works. And so you can either use that image to view it on a Mac, on a laptop on set, or you can put it on a display or whatever to be able to view what you're looking at.
All right, let's see if we can get
Okay.
this going.
1, 2.
Oh my God. All right, yeah, it looks like a pretty big shoot. Like, how many crew members? How many actors?
I think biggest day we probably had about 20 or so, maybe 25, with counting talent.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Okay.
actually, that's not true.
It was 30.
More like, actually, yeah, I'm sorry, that's wrong. It was actually over 30, so 30 some odd people.
Okay. Can you talk about the budget?
No, sorry, we
Okay,
can't.
I tried.
I mean, we definitely did this on a very frugal budget, and I think we're all pretty proud of the quality of what we got in return. We used one of the locations you saw here was a pretty interesting, adventurous place to work downtown. It was a dilapidated warehouse, which felt like it was going to fall apart. So I think we're all a little nervous about Kim and a few of the other actors running around and perhaps falling through the floorboards, but
the good thing was they would let us do whatever the hell we wanted. So
We
we
could drill into the wall.
we put lights and drilled lights into weird places and set up all sorts of weird stuff to make it look creepy as hell. And that was a big plus for sure.
All right. Yeah?
Budget, what percentage of budget would have not existed if it wasn't joint camera, joint stitching, and joint production?
how much of the
Percentage.
post process is not included in our budget? I'm not sure exactly what the price per stitching per footage is off the top of my head. So we
Can you
so,
repeat the question?
are you you're technically asking like whether or not the price of renting the camera and
Well, here's a product.
right?
How long? 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 30
Yeah,
minutes?
about 8 minutes.
That's a VR product of 30 minutes at high quality,
Yeah.
but it's produced by the makers of the camera, as opposed to a production studio that you want to rent the camera.
Sure.
And to use the stitching service and sign the TOS and upload this content.
Yeah.
You're nothing with a budget, percentage.
That's a
I
very
think-
sneaky question because there's official rates for renting the camera and stitching.
Yeah.
So if he tells you the percentage, you'll be able to find out how
We
much.
what I was gonna say is we work with
No, it is to rent the camera and go shoot my own movie.
Sure.
And it's my movie.
Right. So there's two parts to that. we typically require a right to distribute the content on the Jaunt app, but no, you still own it, but we still like reserve the right to, I think as of right now, distribute the content on the app. But we do work with Radiant Images, who's technically our camera house partner. So if you want to rent the camera, if you want to find out about Jaunt Cloud Services, you would essentially go to Radiant Images and work with them as any other camera house would.
I think Radiant currently has the exclusive license to rent Jaunt cameras and are familiar with pricing and not only of the camera but also of the cloud services and the stitching process.
Where it's 2K individual modules, so each module is producing 2K.
Time 24.
Yeah. So
And I believe what you're getting back from the cloud is an 8K,
It's
right?
a 4K. It's basically 24 images that are 1920 by 1200, and those get stitched together to, in mono, have a 1920, 3840 by 1920 image. So it's basically 3K, or 4K, sorry.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to post. Oh yes.
Just had a quick question about foveal rendering, which a lot of people think is the future of high resolution inset video, where your fovea is being tracked in real time, and then if you have a camera with 48K and then you're cooking it down to 4K, you don't need to cook it down to 4K. You can just cook the foveal inset channel down to 4K, and that kind of thing. I mean, have you talked about that? Future camera design and development?
I think it's a player thing. It's not a camera thing. I mean, you shoot with the full resolution you want, but at Oculus Connect 3 2 weeks ago, Oculus has announced that they've been working on a new generation of VR player that will, exactly what you're talking about, detect where the people are looking and will buffer an area around where you're looking at, but you will only stream the area that you're looking at, so we can optimize the resolution. You don't have to have just 4K for a full sphere where you're only looking at a small percentage of the sphere. And Oculus had made available this new player to 2 companies, Felix and Paul and Jaunt. So this is definitely coming very, very soon, yeah. I'm gonna go to post-production. Yes?
No. I mean, in a nutshell, right now, the app itself has no restrictions. So, and the primary demographic is males from 18 to 34. So that's been the primary focus. But we did work with Lily Singh this last year, who's a pretty enormous YouTube star, and I think her fan base and demographic is young female teens. So there's definitely an interest in doing more content like that. But yeah, it's just the process of focusing on the primary demographic and then trying to develop more content that fits those as well. We're working with Disney to do a lot of different things in the future right now. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of plans for that.
Can we try and play it now?
Play what?
The piece.
The Disney pieces? Oh, the game.
Could probably show
Wanna
them
try
now.
to retry the Jaunt player?
Isn't that working?
We can try
The
that.
music's working.
No, it is working.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Then people will have questions.
If you want to, drive it? Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. More.
Do we have sound?
We hope.
Okay.
Which one is it? This one?
Thank you.
Game, Comic Con.
You know what it is, right? Yeah, Comic-Con XAG.
Yeah. Oh god.
We want to drop that into the Jaunt player. Do you know that?
Let's-
by chance?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
It's not as of now, no.
Are we ready
Yeah.
to do it? Okay. I'm not gonna swing. This is a 360 image, and I could swing it around. I'm just gonna basically play it as in one direction, just because I think it's too confusing for everybody to try and follow that. So.
You should follow the
Welcome, sir, to the game.
What did we miss?
Hello, Sarah. Calm down, Sarah. Sarah, calm down. Listen to me. Are you listening to me, Sarah? Good. Because your life depends on it. You've been selected to participate in the game. A very special and exclusive game. You will compete against other participants in order to win your life and freedom. I have selected you for traits that I feel will enable you to win. The question will be whether or not you can see them as well and believe in that power. Your game begins now. You must find your first opponent. When the time comes, remember that I selected you for specific reasons. If you do, I have no doubt that you will win and live.
Pretty good.
so dark.
Thank you. Well, finally we saw it. So that brings me to actually another question about directing and storytelling in VR, which is the choice of who is the camera. You seems to have picked the third person position, fly on the wall kind of thing. Can you explain the reason why this choice and why not first person?
Yeah, we definitely like the angel over the shoulder perspective. We feel that if you're going to go that first person route, you're at risk of making it feel a little too video gamey, especially when you're trying to do more cinematic types of content. At least that's kind of our way of thinking, and that was our approach for doing this project and this show. So yeah, that is a good question, and a lot of people have different thoughts about the right way to do it. But once again, I think you have to choose the right perspective for the content and for the project type. So for us, it was important to give it that angel over the shoulder feeling.
Can you talk a little bit about the editing process?
Yeah,
Did you edit yourself, John?
sort of to build off earlier in terms of audio and how that plays a part in 360 VR, as well as the visual cues. There's a couple different philosophies, I think, when I started in VR about how editing and the pacing of shots should play out.
Yeah.
Coming from a more, I guess, attention deficit generation, I think the pacing of editorial, in my background as well, is a pretty quick pace. And I think the major consumers, or at least the ones that are spearheading this technology, are younger audiences, and you kind of have to retain how you want to tell a story in the cinema aspect of that, but also be cognizant of what people are expecting, how they consume content in that short attention span, and that does play into the pacing of shots. And I think, certain people, when I first started, were thinking that a shot should be played out for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and frankly, I thought that was pretty fucking boring. But it also allows you to take that 2D Presidium-based directing / editing control of forcing audiences where you want them to look. With a shorter edit, they only have so much time to look around. Now, if you have a 15, 20-second shot, people are likely to start twirling around in their seat and wandering all over the place, even if there's only 2 characters in a given setting. So I think a tighter edit, specifically when you want the audience to be focused in a specific location, is very advantageous to telling the story that you really want as a content creator and storyteller.
That's very interesting, because as directors trying to make people look like where you want them to look, you have sound, you have light, acting, obviously, but that's an interesting point, as editing also is part of that. If you do short enough shots, then they won't be looking all around. So what is the average length of a shot in the game, if there is one?
It varies. Obviously, we've got the shots in the hallways were fairly long,
but it's a moving shot.
Yeah,
so that's also
right. So that's a little bit hypocritical of me, I guess. The shots in here were typically maybe 10 to 15 seconds. I think most of the other work that I've done, and the sequence between Kim and one of the other co-stars, and the fight sequence, which you don't see here, is a much more traditional. There's a lot of over the shoulders. We did some handheld stuff, so some really interesting movement in order to keep people. If you're not looking at the 2 characters fighting, then there might be a problem with what you're interested in. But it is, though, that sequence in particular was probably anywhere between 3 to 5 seconds, and then the stuff in the warehouse was obviously much longer. So, it really just depends on the movement of the camera, the setup, and what's going on in the frame. So.
And last but not least, color. Can you tell us about the difference for you as a colorist between VR, traditional? Are you using your skills to do the same thing, help direct the people's attention to where the story is, or?
Yeah, it's a couple of things in terms of the color and finishing. Some of it is guiding the eye. Because you have a single image that shows you the whole room, and sometimes it's really not that interesting to see that piece of garbage or lint in that corner of the room, even though someone can see it. So rather than making the image look like a CVS pharmacy where everything's lit and you can see everything, I will do windows in certain areas to to shroud areas to guide their eye toward the action. And one of the other things that John can speak to, I think a little bit more is as you have an edit, you're able to yaw the camera around to be able to have the next shot land. Even if you didn't shoot it this way, you can rotate the whole sphere so that the next shot lands in a place where you may want someone to be looking. In the same way that in 3D you depth balance the edit, you need to yaw the edit around so that you're not having people continuing trying to find the action. And the other part of my role is sort of an imaging and mastering role, and that is to clean up things, maybe do visual effects within that environment to be able to clean up the image. Not from a fixing standpoint as much as maybe you're darkening the image in a very different way than it was actually shot. So sometimes you'll get blockiness or artifacting because you're bringing the image down so much. So what's really helpful in VR is to be able to freeze the image, and so only where there's action is the thing moving. And I think that's really helpful.
Can you talk a little bit about the transmodal aspect of VR, that you're going to release this onto Facebook and Oculus and a phone, and my phone is not color graded. So how do you guarantee the quality of your work on all those platforms?
That's a very good question. I think that it's really tough to be able to finish something when it's going to be distributed on multiple different devices. And I think that it's, especially when I'm working with remote clients, sometimes they'll be looking at something on a Samsung phone, and I'll be looking at it on a monitor or an Oculus Rift. And you always find that you're chasing yourself, where someone's asking for more red when it looks perfectly red to me, So I think that what you need to do when you do a VR project is to decide on what your hero release format is, and whether that's a Gear VR or an iPhone or whatever the OS is, and you basically put a very confident flag in the ground, and you're saying our hero release format is this format. And then you do your damnedest to make it look the best you can on that format. Otherwise, you end up watering things down, and it looks very mediocre across all platforms. And that's why it's quite frustrating for me as a colorist to see this here with the lights up, because I've done very nuanced, careful work to make it look very dark, and I'm sure you can't see half of the stuff that I did. Anyhow.
Sorry about that.
No,
there is a very quick question about the level of blacks for the headset. I've heard something about especially in the Oculus or the Samsung Gear VR, there is an issue with blacks, like real blacks.
For the Oculus, right?
It really depends. I think what it is there's a lack of standards in the finishing environment, and unlike digital cinema, which has a very clear specified standard, because you're going to different phones, there's a lot of color space manipulation between each device. And I think that because of the lack of standards, sometimes when things get ported over from one device to the other, when you graded something in a certain look, sometimes it looks crushed in that other environment. So I think what's really important is to be able to specify that hero release format, and then you can make sure that the mastering works to that environment. And if you have to tweak it around for other devices, you can do that as a post-process.
And is SIMT working on something for VR?
There are committees that are working on it. I'm not sure what's been, I think the hardest thing is that you never really know where someone's phone is and how bright their phone is set, and you don't know. Samsung, for example, likes to have the images look really poppy, and so it's super saturated. So I can talk for way too long about it, but I think that it, suffice it to say, I think it's important that you get very clear as to what that hero format is, and then make it look best, because otherwise you're making your whole product mediocre to try and chase yourself and in this device or that device or whatever.
We have time for a couple of questions. Yes?
Do you think you could add some extra tagging information in the player that could get passed to the phone, maybe if the manufacturer's cooperating, would sort of self-grade and feed the information back to the player, and then you could put in some kind of compensation scheme prior to playing?
Absolutely.
Very quickly,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, this allows all this continuity.
I think that's true. I think unlike proscenium-based entertainment, I think that having a vision from, shooting to post to wherever it's going to be is really important, so that that metadata can travel with, because I think all of those things that we're bringing up now is very important, knowing what the output device is and getting your point about the bit depth and making the resolution be sharp and high where you want to be looking. It's all very important. I think that there are a lot of different teams working on that.
And yeah, maybe future players can have pre-LUTs they can detect which device you're using and load a different LUT for each device.
Exactly right.
That would, yeah, definitely. Looking forward to this. Yeah. More question? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hi, this plays into the question and just answer there, in that if I'm doing a show called Gotham and it has an amazing colors, at the end of the day, I don't know who has an LG versus a Sony or any other television. The whole notion of shooting metadata is one thing, but doesn't it encumber about creating a relationship with manufacturers to actually accept or report or put their particular standards out there so that can be met? Because at the end of the day, there has to be some owners of the manufacturer.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know how many people here are familiar with the Academy color encoding system, the ACES, but I think that it's important in that way for manufacturers to get on board to be able to quantify their device so that those standards can be incorporated and it's not this wild, wild west, which it currently is right now.
And that's not new. I mean, Dave and I come from stereoscopic 3D, and back in the days, I remember we had to do 3 different DCPs of our movies, one for the Real D system, one for the Dolby 3D system, and one for the active glasses system. And I don't know, they never were able to like sit down at the same table and talk and figure out something. So we only have to do one DCP with, and it would work for all the systems. Hopefully, this is going to happen with VR. We're going to try. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To your point, I mean, we are mastering things in standard color spaces like sRGB and Rec 709, which is our sort of normal environment, and we are making them look good. We are using calibrated viewing environments to be able to finish these shows, and then we are testing them through to that hero device that we're specifying and making sure that not only are they looking good on the monitor in Rec 709, but they're also looking good on that hero device. But my point is that you can't pick multiple heroes, because then you're just chasing yourself, really.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear a little bit more about all those tracking shots that you did. That's fairly novel in cinematic VR to move the camera. Obviously, you planned for it, but what were the consequences in post? And more time, casting out.
Yeah. I mean, for this particular.
Repeat the question, please.
So, okay. He's asking basically about camera movement and how we dealt with it pre-production and post. We were lucky to work with a colleague out of the South Bay who has his own, I wouldn't call him necessarily a MoCo rig, but remote dolly. And for this particular project, we were unable to recreate the floor. For time and resources, essentially. But we put the Jaunt 1, which is a 22-pound camera, on the rig, and it seemed to work pretty well. We're also shooting a project right now that's going to be released in the next month. That was shot in the Amazon forest, and they use a lot of cable cams and all sorts of other things. They have a much more robust post process in terms of recreating jungle floors and the poles on the camera itself. So. I think it was imperative for us to incorporate movement. I think up until fairly recently, a lot of people were just sticking cameras in a spot, kind of theater in the round type of approach, and letting it run. And I think as a novelty, VR may be able to roll with that for a while, but people are, especially in this age, are going to expect more dynamic movement, more dynamic color, everything that goes along with a polished product. So, that was definitely something that we were vehement about incorporating into the show.
Okay, we're running a bit late. Okay, go.
Okay, hi, I'll try to be really quick and I'll be as long as I can. Sure. Story tracks. What do you guys think is the future of VR storytelling? Is it the user being guided by the story, or is it the user actually experiencing the story itself, or they kind of choose their own adventure?
Very good question.
We can all talk about this, but you guys want to start?
I think, I think we all see it. Video games here and film VR here, and it's headed in this really cool angle, especially with some new cameras that have this kind of depth and choice of that. But it's just the bit rates are going to be like crazy high, so we have to deal with all that stuff like far down the line. But I think we're headed in a direction where, well, if anyone saw, what was that one that Rachel worked on? Gone, they had a really cool thing where you could choose, you'd look in the direction and then it had a little circle thing and it would it would warp you to another part of that scene going on simultaneously to the storyline. So I think that is part of what we're kind of talking about, and I think that's part of what makes this medium so awesome is there's a lot of different possibilities. Again, we got to serve the story. Story always comes first. So if you're just doing it for novelty, like John was talking about earlier, it's a gimmick and it doesn't work. But if it really serves the story, then yeah, got to do that.
Yeah, there's just so many cool applications for it. In one instance, I read recently, they're teaching people who have been paralyzed in various tragic incidents how to walk again. And they're using VR in a medical capacity. But from sports to docu stuff to cinematic horror stuff like we're doing in short films, I think there are just so many cool places to take VR. And it is a combination of various different things. I don't think there's one, tried and true direction for it, but I think it's kind of a collection of all those things, a cornucopia, if you will.
I just real quick, I have a somewhat strong opinion on the POV thought process of VR, and I'm not a fan of it. I think if you're transported into this medium and you look down on someone else's body, I think that's actually counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve, which is immersiveness, and may take you actually pretty quickly out of the story. But that being said, I'm not much of a video gamer anymore, and I've played the Vive and those video games, and I'm scared for my free time because it's pretty addicting. So there's definitely a space, I think, for all these different approaches. And real quick, tangential, I think the commentary out there right now about AR is really the future, I think, is comparing apples and oranges. They're quite different approaches, and if someone can figure out how to tell a story through AR, I think that'll be pretty incredible. Right now, I think that's a very tall task, and so AR is interacting with the world around you. VR is more cinematic. Lights go down, and you listen to a story. So anyway, that's my. There
is a lot of VRs in VRs. Cinematic VRs, interactive VRs, branching storytelling. There's so many types of VR. At Oculus Connect, once again, a new term was introduced. There's every week in VR we invent new words. It's very exciting, which was augmented virtual reality. And that's a whole different layer of what we can do in terms of storytelling when we have glasses that will be both AR and VR and be able to scan your room, apply a different skin on your walls. And there's a whole crazy, this is the Pandora's box we're opening. This panel is more about cinematic VR, which is sit down and relax and watch the story that we crafted for you. But yeah, thank you for this question. I want to just give Kimberly the last word for this panel because I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm fine.
In terms of being an actor, being a character, telling the story, what do you think is the future for virtual reality and in storytelling?
Well, this was again my first experience in VR, and I think their approach is the right one, which is taking it almost like a film, like your normal experience watching a television show or a movie where it's edited, but you can experience it in a different way, where you're watching the scene go on, but you can also see, oh, those people over there are fainting behind me, what's going on here. But as an actor, I think it's cool. It's a great new medium to work in, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
You want to do more VR?
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your patience and having drinks with us. You're welcome to. They brought some headsets, Samsung Gear VR, so if you want to see the whole